I'm 16 years old. Since the age of 9, I've been diagnosed with ADHD, anxiety, dyslexia, dyspraxia, executive function disorder, OCD, sensory processing issues, tics, and Merzbacher syndrome. I don't even know what that one is. But labels on everything, and I'm here to tell you why. In the space of 8 years, I've been assessed and supported by 6 psychiatrists, 4 educational psychologists, 3 CAMHS clinicians, 2 speech and language therapists, a behavioural optometrist, an occupational therapist, and a psychotherapist. And trust me, it's cost my dad a fortune. When I joined secondary school, I already had an EHCP, which is also known as an education and healthcare plan. This stated my conditions, how they affected me, and what the school needed to do to support me. With that came a huge file. It made me look violent, defiant, and challenging. It gave people that read it a negative expectation, and this affected my schooling experience. I was always treated differently. I'd have detentions nearly every day after school, multiple internal and external exclusions, and I don't think I went one day without getting in some form of trouble. I was misunderstood. It made me hate school, and by the end of the first term of year 8, my attendance was at 42%. It was at this point that I stopped attending. My last day at mainstream secondary school, I remember coming home and running to my bedroom. I shut my door and I hid under my covers for 4 hours. My mum asked me why I couldn't come out. I said, I don't want to come out because all that's going to cause is trouble. The following day, I visited the GP who agreed to sign me off school until systems were put in place to enable me to manage. The reality was that I was never going to return to mainstream school. I then spent 6 months being homeschooled, and it was the loneliest time of my life. I was then enrolled into a small therapeutic school. I hated having to go there because I never saw myself as different, and I thought being in a school with just 18 other people made me different. My first 2 years there, I did no academic work. All I did was focus on my well-being. If it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be where I am now. When I got to year 11, I realised that I wanted to succeed, and that I couldn't do that without putting in the work. My aim was always to stay on track, and I never wanted to be kept a year behind. I was always told that I wouldn't get any GCSEs. I now have 7. I did all of my GCSEs in the space of 8 months. The fact that I had to do 7 2-year courses in the space of 8 months was one of the most difficult things that I've ever had to do, but it was worth it because I got to see the look on my parents' face when I opened my results. I'm now doing 3 A-levels and an EPQ at King Alfred's. This shows that change is possible, and no matter how many negative expectations people have about you, you can surpass these and you can succeed even with labels. The reason I'm reflecting on my journey is to question how things would have been if there had been no labelling, if my file had not arrived at the school before me, and how this connected me to my previous self. Are the labels a help or a hindrance? Certain labels have negative connotations. Let's face it. Who's going to think that a child is going to be compliant if they're labelled as oppositional or aggressive? Knowing this prior to meeting an individual will inevitably result in judgments being made, such as, we'll need to put a member of staff with this child at all times in order to protect others. However, this may not be required. How about asking the question, do outbursts only happen at certain times of the day or in particular environments? Or were there sensory processing issues which may impact how well the child copes if they are in a noisy classroom, which perhaps may trigger them to go into the fight or flight mode? My experience was that the child's voice was not heard whilst in mainstream school. Punishments were the norm, and no one took the time to get to know what worked best for me. When something wasn't working, nothing new was tried. This was an uphill struggle, not only for me, but also for my family. However, there are without a doubt positives about my labelling. Without my labels and the healthcare plan that I received in primary school, I would not have gained access to the specialist school, and I would not be here today. I know so many people who struggle with mainstream schooling who would have benefited from a provision like mine. At that school, they weren't particularly interested in the labels or the paperwork provided. They simply wanted to settle me and for me to show them what I could and couldn't manage. Life became back on track and I was enabled. Slowly but surely, the damage in mainstream school was undone, and I learned so much about myself and I thrived. In a couple of years, I hope to go to university. And one thing that I am not taking with me is that file. Thank you.